So I heard a lot about Fargo Season 4 before I watched it, with its reputation as the ugly stepsister of the series. Everywhere I went, people were full of praise for the first and second season, some the third, but practically every fan of the show I came across had a dismissive attitude towards the fourth season of Fargo. Of course, this quote-unquote research I did was mainly glancing at the IMDb reviews of the show, and IMDb reviews have nosedived in quality in recent years anyway. But there was a lot of talk about Fargo going woke, Fargo having become politically correct, and I haven't got anything against diversity and inclusion, but when it comes to political correctness, tokenism and virtue signaling, I'm usually the first to roll my eyes, partly because I see through the facade and find it extremely disingenuous and condescending when you have an industry as toxic as Hollywood, with its treatment of women and minorities behind the scenes, trying to preach and lecture the average Joe. Anyway, with all that being said, I didn't get that vibe at all from Fargo Season 4. I really don't see where the complaints are coming from that the season was full of political correctness. Maybe some, like a weird lesbian interracial bandit couple, and if that isn't the consensus anyway, well, maybe I was just doing my research in all the wrong places. It does have issues, major issues, but we'll get into that. So, set in Kansas City in the 50s, this season follows two crime syndicates as they compete for control of the underworld. Chris Rock leads the Black Crime Syndicate, and Jason Schwartzman leads the Italian gangsters. And after a period of unease, tension, and mistrust, a mob war erupts between the two factions. Other characters include Oretta Mayflower, a deceptively cheerful nurse who goes around killing her patients, Otis Weff, a bent cop with many nervous tics, and Ethelreda Pearl Smutney, an intelligent black teen who is something of the season's anchor through which the story is told. Overall, I liked the fourth season of Fargo, but I feel it has some big issues and as such comes off as uneven, because it's essentially a mob war, and as a fan of gangster movies and TV shows, I've seen a lot of these. It didn't really add anything new to the table, and told a relatively straightforward story of a crime war. Perhaps this contributed to my not really feeling compelled to watch it. I took gaps between episodes because I just really wasn't feeling it at times. It didn't quite grip you like the first two seasons did. And that's interesting itself because season 2 was also essentially a mob war, but the characters there were more interesting, the story was told better, and it had more to say. The opening of the season tells an interesting tale of the history of the Kansas City underworld, with powers changing hands between the likes of the Irish, the Italians, and the African Americans. Like ancient empires of old, the factions swap sons to be taken as hostages by rival families in order to maintain uneven truces and periods of peace. A young Irish boy is swapped, for example, and he ends up working for his new Italian family, betraying his own people. And in adulthood, he takes custodianship and care of the African American kid who has been swapped into the Italian crime family. It's pretty cool, but the thing is, the show doesn't really do anything much with the concept, nor the two characters after this. I mean, wasn't this a perfect concept to say something about culture and immigration? The Irishman and the kid Satchel were solid characters, especially when you find out that Satchel is actually Mike Milligan from season 2. But it's like they just then stick him in the corner for most of the season, giving him something like 5 lines and a 1,000-yard stare as his only contribution. I thought his new family would be the Kansas City mob from season 2, and this is how he as a black man began working for such an organization. That would have been an appropriate origin story. But like Ridley Scott's Prometheus, where it chose not to be an alien prequel, they intentionally went out of their way to abandon an idea which would have perfectly synchronized Milligan's upbringing with season 2. And we end with not really knowing much about how he became who he was in season 2. The nurse too, a really creepy character. She's probably the season's closest equivalent to the likes of Malvo and Fargo, this larger-than-life evil force which innocent people become entangled with. But she disappears for large periods of the show, as does Ethelreda and her family. If they're supposed to be the series staple Fargo innocents who get caught up in a whirlwind of evil, they're just not in it enough to make an impact. I mean, her dad just straight up disappears like halfway through. We needed more of them, or at least of Ethelreda, to counterbalance all the fighting and evil with relative normalcy and decency. I think this is one of the main issues with this season. There's a lot of interesting characters, a lot of interesting premises, but not much is done with them, and when the season was about to end, it's like the show panicked and just started killing everyone off in haphazard fashion, which is fitting for Fargo. There's always unexpected and slapdash scenes, but it felt like it was largely a way to wrap the story up. There's the duo of cops, the bent one and the Mormon. There's Schwartzman's psycho brother from the old country, who always speaks like this. A character I thought was really cool, and many others, but not much is done with them, and it feels like there's 20 subplots crammed into the season, some which ended up sacrificed and abandoned, others which are rushed. I mentioned that season 2 could have been even longer, but everything was perfectly paced there, everyone got their moment. Season 4, on the other hand, is noticeably clunkier in its execution and isn't quite able to juggle all the characters and stories as well. I know that some of it was filmed during the pandemic, and I wonder if that contributed. I heard that the final 2 episodes in particular were shot during lockdown, and for sure there were underwhelming elements to these 2 episodes, with the show not ending with the usual Fargo bang. The main problem with this season is that it suffers from 2 instances of woeful miscasting. Chris Rock, who most of us know as a comedian, a wacky loud one at that, almost single-handedly derails this season in one of the worst cases of stunt casting I've seen. He was truly horrific and offered no nuance, no depth. I mean, it's Chris Rock, you get what you paid for. If you want a funny sidekick cop in a Lethal Weapon sequel, or you need a talking zebra, he's your man. But why oh why was he chosen as essentially the main character? He was never convincing in any scene where he was supposed to be menacing, awe-inspiring, scary, sympathetic, anything. Every scene is perfectly set up, the supporting characters are doing their job, it's shot to accommodate, but he comes in and drags everyone down. Like the scene where he shouts at his wife, there's gravitas in the wife's reaction. But Rock's screeching would only elicit giggles from the audience, I feel, not the shock and awe the scene was going for and perfectly set up, only for him not to deliver. There's another where he whips a subordinate, as an example, and it was cringe-inducing hearing him shriek like a train doing an emergency stop. Some of it isn't his fault, he just has a voice more suited to loud comedy, not the quiet, methodical approach you associate with Fargo. I mean, his right-hand man, Dr. Senator, played by Big Dick Mayor Royce, looked, talked, and walked like an absolute badass. I honestly believe if Rock was ditched or relegated to a smaller role, and Glynn Turman played the boss of the family, it would have instantly improved the season and masked many of the issues. Rock's counterpart Schwartzman was equally out of his element, playing the boss of the Italians. I only really know him from Wes Anderson films, so I don't know if he has experience with this kind of material. His is a little easier to swallow because he's playing a guy who's supposed to be inadequate and insecure, but that doesn't make him more enjoyable for the viewer, seeing a guy who looks like he walked off the set of a Paul Feig rom-com. His mannerisms, his voice, even the lines he was given all feel too modern and don't come across as authentic for a 1950s character. Again, like Rock, he was surrounded by actors who looked and felt the part. The badass consigliere who would have been way better as the mob boss, the mustache Pete brother who started off as a caricature but does grow on you and develop, but Schwartzman just doesn't fit. I wanted his brother to sit on him. If Rock was playing an equally inept character, I could maybe chalk it off as an intentional move from the show to have these 2 off-key guys running their families, but clearly it wasn't the intention. I mean, you have guys like Jack Huston and Timothy Olyphant here, and they were great. But why am I forced to watch an overgrown child and a banshee when guys like this are in your show? One complaint I see of this season was that it doesn't feel like Fargo. I think there is stock in that complaint. Whether it's the lack of those Midwest accents, or the fact that it is more or less a straightforward gangster drama and lacks the quintessential Fargoisms, I didn't always feel like I was watching a season of Fargo. That's not to say it doesn't have those elements sprinkled in here and there, like that scene where the older boss gets shot by the kids, or when one of the main characters trips and shoots himself in the face. There's also the ghost, which I was really hoping they'd do more with, and a particularly brilliant episode called East West, perhaps the most surreal episode of the entire show. But it does seem to depart from the usual Fargo formula of a normal person committing a crime and being engulfed in a dark world that they don't understand, in over their heads, starting a chain of reaction of events and a small-time cop looking to investigate. In a way it does have that, but that stuff is relegated to small subplots. The main characters are all already criminals. Really, it's just a mob drama, So I can see why someone might have those complaints, and I marginally agree with them. One of the best aspects of the season is the set design, where some technical elements feel lazy and tired, like the whole split screen thing, which really felt redundant here. Season 4 is probably the best looking of all 4 seasons of Fargo. So many shows and even big budget movies fall flat on their face when trying to depict the early or mid 20th century, with nauseating use of green screen, CGI and other elements where they fail to capture the essence of the time period. Fargo was immaculate in this aspect. It didn't feel like a film set at all, and was stupendous in its visual presentation. It really felt like you had been transported back in time, even the choice of the extras. It was like I was watching Boardwalk Empire at times. But then guys like Chris Rock and Jason Schwartzman pop up to remind you that isn't the case. So I enjoyed it. In fact, I probably prefer it to Season 3, which had an opposite problem with not having enough plot. But for sure, it is not on the same level as the first 2 seasons. What did you think of Season 4? Let me know in the comments below, and let me know what show you think I should watch next. Thanks for watching.